What does a relationship look like between a type 6 loyalist and a type 8 challenger? Well, let's start off by talking about a few things that they have in common. The Enneagram 6-8 relationship is about as cohesive as it is volatile, and that's due in large part to the many traits that they have in common. In fact, one of the most common Enneagram mistypes is the more aggressive or counterphobic 6 that actually believes they're an 8 because they're a little bit more combative or seemingly fearless in their approach to some dangerous or risky activities. However, the whole phobic versus counterphobic thing is a lot more nuanced than just that, so if you want to know more about that concept or any of the theories that I discussed throughout this episode, just be sure to watch the complete guides that I've got linked for you in the description below. Alright, many of the shared traits that bring the 6-8 couple together can actually be explained by the harmonic triad, which groups Enneagram types based on the general way that they cope with pain or adversity. 6s and 8s are both in the reactive group of the harmonic triad, which means they have strong emotional reactions to difficult situations. Reactive types also want their loved ones to either mirror or make space for their reactions, especially when shit hits the fan, because that's how they feel safe and connected to their partner. And that's a good segue to another trait that 6s and 8s have in common, which is this deep desire for protection. 6s want to bond with people that are capable of protecting them, while 8s want to be someone capable of protecting the ones they love. These complementary desires create a deep sense of loyalty in this relationship, which is huge as both 6s and 8s see the world as inherently challenging, if not downright threatening. So having some strong allies to watch your back just kind of feels like an essential part of life. This is also why 6s and 8s tend to test people, because they want to see if you're really strong or truly committed, as they believe that actions speak louder than words. On a similar note, 6s and 8s tend to lean way more towards the practical than the sentimental, especially when they're in a relationship together, as honesty, responsibility, and hard work are going to trump any sort of emotional displays of affection. However, both 6s and 8s do have a little bit of a soft spot for those in need, and healthy 8s can even behave a bit like the sacrificial and nurturing type 2 helper, and will use their relentless energy to serve others rather than control them. Likewise, your average 6, and especially those with a 5 wing, will naturally come to the aid of people that they feel like are being unfairly treated or just seem like they're at a disadvantage in some way. Okay, last small thing worth noting here is that this couple can share some of the traits of the type 7 enthusiast, as you can have a 6-wing 7 and an 8-wing 7. I actually believe that in most 6-8 couples, one partner is going to lean heavily towards their 7-wing because it tends to balance out their tendency to have an overly serious demeanor, which in a romantic relationship is pretty helpful for releasing tension and just creating an air of playful intimacy. Alright, those are just a few shared traits for the 6-8 couple. Time now to zoom in a bit on what specifically attracts a type 6 loyalist to the type 8 challenger, and vice versa. Sixes can be some tricky folks to pursue a relationship with because they're often prone to sending mixed messages or being skeptical about your intentions or just having constant doubts about your future together in general. But then in walks the 8 with their immense energy and perhaps their striking physical presence and definitely a tireless pursuit of the more coy 6. And then all of a sudden, no, where'd those doubts and fears go? 6s feed off the confidence and direction of more self-assured types, so 8s naturally stand out from the crowd when it comes time to choose a potential mate. Now I know this next point may ruffle some feathers for the more counterphobic 6s out there, but in general, 6s don't prefer to be the leader in their romantic relationships. Sure, they can lead if they have to, and all 6s want some sphere of influence or control within the relationship. But when it comes to being the chief decision maker at the end of the day, they generally prefer to lay that burden on some other more assertive or more effective person, kind of like a type 8 challenger. As the impinged type of the head triad, 6s just have a really hard time trusting the anxious and potentially irrational thoughts of their overactive mind, which is why they try to make decisions from a mixture of emotion and gut instinct. 8s also navigate life primarily through strong gut instincts, but they usually inform those instincts with the cold rationality of the mind. So the 8's highly assertive and often rational decision making is very attractive to the 6 because it relieves their anxiety, all while making them feel safe enough to take risks, knowing that the big strong 8 is there to come to their rescue if things go sideways. In fact, seeing the 8 come alive when adversity strikes is usually another major point of attraction, if not just a comfort blanket for the 6, who tends to find security through relationships with stronger people or stronger institutions. Alright, last point of attraction for 6s is when the 8 has a 9-wing. 8-wing 9s are nicknamed the bear because they have this way of internalizing their intense energy, which makes them a lot more calm on the surface and a lot less overwhelming than the 8-wing-7 can be. Healthy 6s also integrate many of the best qualities of the Type 9 peacemaker when they feel secure, so the 8-wing-9 provides this constant yet gentle nudge for the 6 to live into their more peaceful yet powerful self. Okay, those are just a few things that 6s tend to find uniquely attractive about 8s. Time now to talk about what 8s find uniquely attractive about 6s. Eights can be attracted to 6s for a whole wide variety of reasons, and much of it is going to come down to whether the 6 is primarily phobic or counterphobic. Now again, it's important to remember that all 6s are a bit of both, and it just depends on the situation or the environment as to whether they're going to lean into those phobic or counterphobic behaviors. Sort of like Indiana Jones, who's going to boldly fight off an entire squad of Nazis and then freak out about a few snakes. All right. A lot of snakes. There's a great saying about this whole concept that goes, phobic 6s want to stand behind their partner, while counterphobic 6s want to stand beside their partner. Now, 8s can enjoy a relationship with either version of the 6, but for totally different reasons. More phobic 6s are attractive because they naturally fall into this kind of support role within the relationship, which then allows the 8 to feel at ease within their preferred place of authoritative leadership. Phobic 6s also tend to bring a more sensitive perspective to the often brash 8, who's a little less attuned to their social impact of their behavior. Speaking of social interactions, 6s in general tend to be a little better at building community, which the 8 loves to join after their long, exhausting periods of total self-reliance that typically drives them into some form of isolation. Last thing that can make phobic 6s just a little bit more attractive is that they tend to be more effusive with praise and affirmation. And while 8s pretend like they don't care what anyone thinks, deep down, they crave the adoration of their partner, and once they have it, they're far more likely to feel safe lowering their guard, tapping into their emotions, and exposing all that vulnerable yet valuable stuff that's hidden inside their heart. Now, switching over to the more counterphobic 6s, they're very attractive to 8s that are looking for more of a partner in crime, if you will. 8s can be incredibly bold and adventurous, and the fact that counterphobic 6s are going to run towards things that scare them as well means that the 8 has found someone that's finally willing to take the same risks as they are, and also knows that without a doubt that they've got each other's back. Counterphobic 6s are incredibly defensive of their loved ones, so if someone throws a grenade at the 8, the counterphobic 6 is either going to jump on it to save the 8 or grab it and throw it right back where it came from. This kind of unquestionable devotion is one of the trademark characteristics of the 6, and it goes a long way in alleviating the 8's trademark fear of abandonment or betrayal. That's also why 8s naturally form such incredibly deep bonds with 6s in a way that's almost unrivaled by any other Enneagram type combination. But with that said, the 6-8 relationship is not without its fair share of drama. So now that we've covered more than a few points of attraction, it's time to shift gears and talk about what conflict looks like between 6s and 8s. Hey there, friend. Looks like you're a little more than halfway through this Enneagram relationship episode, which means it's a great time to not only watch this fancy little neon graphic float off into the distance, but to hit those like and subscribe buttons, you know? You know what I mean? You know those buttons that are sitting right there? Don't be coy, you know where they are. You know, if you're feeling non-committal, you can just hit the like button. It's still really helpful. Okay, let's get back to it. If you're in a 6-8 relationship, then you are likely very familiar with conflict. In fact, this couple is well known for being one of the most conflict-oriented Enneagram pairings out there because they bring this unique mixture of intense anxiety and intense anger, which is kind of like putting a box of matches next to a pool of gasoline. Now, if we take another look at the triad centers, you'll see that 8s are gut types that primarily struggle with anger, and 6s are head types that primarily struggle with anxiety. So in going back to my original analogy, I bet some people might have thought 8s were the pool of gasoline and 6s were the matches, but it is in fact the other way around. 8s are constantly flaring up with aggression, and they are far more direct in their antagonism of the 6 because their anger makes them feel powerful. But 6s, and especially those counterphobic 6s, are wired to anxiously defend their sense of security. And so they become this big old pool of don't f with me gasoline whenever they feel threatened. So it's often just a matter of time until the 8 flicks one of those angry matches at the 6's flammable pool of anxiety and the whole thing goes up in flames. Now, this highly combustible dynamic is also explained in part by the harmonic triad, which I know I referenced at the very beginning of the episode. As reactive types, both 6s and 8s are counterpunchers, if you will, as they tend to react strongly to whatever is coming at them. So once they get stung in a relationship, they typically raise their guard and try to anticipate the next time that you're going to swing at them so they can either dodge your attack or counter with one of their own. As you can imagine, that creates a lot of unnecessary tension between the 6 and the 8 because they start anticipating attacks that aren't even coming simply because they're just so tuned up for a fight. It's very much the epitome of the old saying that goes, if all you've got is a hammer, then every problem looks like a nail. And once the 6-8 couple slips into hammer time, it becomes really difficult for them to trust each other long enough to lower their guard and call for a truce. Ultimately, the big red flag for this couple is when either or both partners start to vilify the other person, and so their counterattacks just become increasingly personal, public, and possibly even a little violent. But as I always say, that is just one of many possible outcomes for this couple, and there are plenty of things that your average 6-8 couple can do to avoid all of this relational turbulence. Or at least a lot of this relational turbulence. So on that note, let's talk about a few practical things this couple can do to have a healthier future together. Okay, the first piece of advice I'd give this couple is to simply notice the feedback loop that exists between the 6's anxiety and the 8's anger. Just notice it. For 6's, your anxiety tends to anger the 8 because they see it as a sign of weakness, and they just hate weakness in themselves so much that they can't bear it in anyone close to them either. Now for 8's, your anger makes the 6 doubt the stability of the relationship, which causes tons of anxiety for the 6 as they fear losing the security of their familiar committed relationships more than anything else in this life. Now, once this couple can notice this pattern playing out in real time, they then have the chance to press pause and lean into a more vulnerable conversation about what's really going on below the surface. Oftentimes there's some buried emotion like grief, regret, or shame that's fueling all this couple's intense interactions. And if they can just find the courage to pinpoint and express those scary emotions, they can finally break out of this cycle and have the opportunity for a truly healing conversation that isn't riddled with tons of anxious or angry reactions. Now, I know that is way easier said than done, because in order to have this kind of vulnerable interaction, it has to be a two-way street. And both 6's and 8's have their fair share of trust issues that make it really hard for either person to feel safe being the first person to let their guard down. Now, if it were up to me, I would nominate the 8 to go first in sharing the things that make them feel uncomfortably vulnerable, because it typically has a bigger impact coming from someone who normally fights so hard for positions of power and authority, rather than the more, let's say, naturally modest 6. But hey, that's just my opinion, and at the end of the day, it's just important to remember that you're on the same team. And that's something that this couple is prone to forget, because stressed out 6's and 8's tend to see threats coming from everywhere. And the more disconnected this couple gets, the more likely they are to start seeing each other as a threat rather than a teammate. Speaking of teamwork, the 6-8 couple does much better together once they align on their specific roles and responsibilities within the relationship. 6's thrive when they feel like they have some manageable and meaningful tasks they can accomplish for the good of the group or the family or the relationship. But the problem is that most 8's want to make every significant decision on behalf of the couple, from how they manage finances to where they live to how the kids are raised. That creates a pretty narrow sphere of influence for the 6, who needs to feel like they have some say over the important stuff in their life, and especially at home. So it may be tricky, it will definitely require some compromise, and it may even require an objective third party to help guide the conversation. But it's essential for the long-term stability of this relationship to have an agreed upon balance of authority and responsibility between both partners. All right, since I'm probably starting to spike the 8's blood pressure a little bit, I'll stop with the advice and move on to a far less serious and far less helpful segment of the episode, which is the YGAT relationship rating system. First up on the YGAT relationship rating system is the spice meter. And since we've got two reactive types and one with immense physical energy, I'm gonna put them 3/4 of the way over at about an 8 out of 10. However, if the 6 is primarily counterphobic or has even mistyped as an 8 in the past, then this couple will definitely be redlining it way over 10 out of 10 at muy picante. Next up is the power meter. And with the mixture of the 8's unyielding take charge attitude and the 6's high tolerance for hard work, I'd say you could get a fairly powerful couple. So again, I'm gonna put them 3/4 of the way over, somewhere between productive and presidential. That leaves us with the fun meter, and while the 8 is prone to seeking out some intense or indulgent experiences, the responsibility of the 6 usually keeps their adventures a bit more grounded. So just to be safe, I'm going to put them right in the middle, somewhere around international escapades. Alright, there you have it, the Enneagram 6-8 pairing. A super spicy, very productive couple that would probably travel the world together if they just didn't have so much to do back at home. That's a wrap on this Enneagram relationship episode for the Type 8 Challenger with a Type 6 Loyalist. If you're shutting it down here, then I will say thank you so much for watching. I really hope you enjoyed it, and please do me a favor and hit those like and subscribe buttons on the way out if you wouldn't mind. But hey, if you're sticking around for more Enneagram goodness, then I have got plenty of relationship-themed content for you to choose from right here on the screen, as well as some more lighthearted content if you need a mental or emotional break. Take your pick.